The gunshot echoed through Eagar, Arizona like thunder, sending Helena Reed diving behind an overturned wagon as dust kicked up around her. It was 1878, and she'd arrived in this small frontier town just 3 hours ago, already finding herself caught in the crossfire between the town marshal and a gang of would-be bank robbers. This wasn't the fresh start she'd been hoping for after burying her parents back east. "Stay down, madam." A deep voice commanded as a tall figure slid into position beside her, Winchester rifle at the ready. He wore a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, his Stetson pulled low over eyes that assessed the situation with practiced calm. "I didn't plan on standing," Helena snapped, clutching her carpet bag to her chest. The man beside her fired once, the shot precise, and a howl of pain followed from across the street. "Mason O'Malley," he introduced himself without taking his eyes off the gunfight. "Welcome to Eagar." Helena almost laughed at the absurdity. "Charmed, I'm sure." The gunfire ceased after a final volley, and the marshal's voice rang out announcing the bandits were either captured or fled. Mason stood, offering Helena his hand. His face was sun-weathered but handsome, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard. He couldn't be more than 30. "You all right, miss?" He helped her to her feet, careful not to pull too hard. "Helena Reed," she replied, brushing dust from her dark traveling dress. "And yes, though this isn't quite the welcome I expected." Mason's smile revealed a small dimple in his right cheek. "We usually save the gunfights for Saturdays. You're early." Despite everything, Helena found herself smiling back. "I'll try to be more punctual next time." "Where were you headed before all this excitement?" Mason asked, retrieving her hat which had fallen during her dive for cover. "The boarding house." "Mrs. Wilkins is expecting me," Mason nodded. "I know Edith well. Let me escort you. It's the least I can do after such a rude welcome to our town." He picked up her second bag before she could protest. As they walked down Eagar's Main Street, Helena took in the frontier town. Despite the recent commotion, life was already returning to normal. A general store, saloon, blacksmith, and small church formed the backbone of the community, with scattered homes and businesses extending outward. In the distance, mountains rose against the azure sky, their majesty untamed and beautiful. "You've come a long way," Mason observed, noting her Eastern clothes and accent. "Philadelphia," Helena confirmed. "My parents passed within months of each other. Consumption." She hadn't planned to share this with a stranger, but something about Mason's steady presence invited confidence. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply, with a sincerity that Helena found refreshing after months of practiced condolences. "Thank you. I came west to teach. The advertisement said Eagar needed a schoolteacher." Mason's expression brightened. "That would be my doing, actually. I'm on the town council. Our last teacher left to get married last spring. The children have been running wild since." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story white clapboard building with green shutters and a wrap-around porch. Mason set her bags down and tipped his hat. "Mrs. Wilkins will take good care of you. Once you're settled, I'd be honored to show you around town properly without the bullets." His smile was warm, inviting. Helena surprised herself by saying, "I'd like that, Mr. O'Malley." "Mason," he corrected. "We're not much for formalities out here." "Mason," she echoed, testing the name on her tongue. "Until later, then." As he walked away, Helena found herself watching him longer than propriety dictated. There was something solid about him, dependable in a way she hadn't encountered before. She shook her head at her own foolishness. She was here to teach and build a new life for herself, not to notice the way a cowboy's shoulders filled out his shirt or how his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Mrs. Wilkins proved to be a cheerful widow in her 60s who showed Helena to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Hot water's brought up Saturday evenings whether you need it or not," she explained with a wink. "Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. Miss them and you'll wait for the next." After washing away the dust of travel and changing into a fresh dress, Helena ventured downstairs to find Mason waiting in the parlor, hat in hand, engaged in friendly conversation with Mrs. Wilkins. "There she is," Mrs. Wilkins exclaimed. "Mason here tells me you've already experienced some Eagar excitement. If that's what you call nearly being shot, then yes, Helena replied dryly. Mason laughed. I promise the rest of your stay will be much quieter, ready for that tour. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Eagar as Mason showed Helena around. The schoolhouse was a modest building with one large room, a wood stove, and rows of battered desks. It's not much, Mason apologized as he unlocked the door, but the town pitched in last year to buy new books. Helena ran her fingers over the teacher's desk, already imagining herself standing before a classroom of frontier children. It's perfect, Mason watched her, a curious expression on his face. You really mean that, don't you? I do, she confirmed. In Philadelphia, I was just one of dozens of teachers. Here, I can make a real difference. Their tour continued with introductions to shopkeepers and townspeople, all of whom welcomed Helena warmly. By the time they reached the livery stable at the edge of town, the sun was beginning to set. And this, Mason said with evident pride, is my place. Helena looked at him in surprise. You're not a cowboy, he chuckled. I run cattle on my ranch outside town, but this stable is my business in Eagar. I breed and train horses too. Inside the stable, the sweet smell of hay and the gentle nickering of horses greeted them. Mason led her to a stall where a beautiful Palomino mare stood. This is Sunflower, he said, stroking the horse's nose. She's gentle as can be and needs exercise. I thought you might like to ride her while you're here, Helena hesitated. It's been years since I've ridden. She'll take care of you, Mason assured her, and I could show you some of the countryside on Sunday after church if you'd like. The offer was tempting. Helena had been independent for so long, wary of relying on anyone since her father fell ill. But Mason's offer seemed to come without strings attached, just simple frontier hospitality. I'd like that, she said finally. They walked back to the boarding house as twilight deepened into dusk. Fireflies began to appear, flickering like earthbound stars. Thank you for the tour, Helena said as they reached Mrs. Wilkins' porch. My pleasure, Mason replied. I'll call for you Sunday at 10 after the service. Helena nodded, suddenly shy. Good night, Mason. Good night, Miss Reed. Helena, she corrected with a smile. His answering grin was worth the small impropriety. Helena. That night, as she prepared for bed in her small room, Helena found herself thinking about Mason O'Malley. His kindness seemed genuine, his manner forthright. So different from the polished, calculating men who had courted her in Philadelphia, not that she was thinking of courtship. Helena reminded herself sternly that romance wasn't in her plans. She'd come to Eagar to teach and to heal from her losses, not to lose her heart to the first handsome man who showed her kindness. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, it was Mason's smile that followed her into her dreams. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Helena dressed carefully in her best blue dress and joined Mrs. Wilkins for the walk to church. The small white building was packed with families, and Helena found herself the object of curious but friendly glances as Mrs. Wilkins introduced her around as our new schoolteacher. Mason sat with an elderly man near the front. He caught her eye and nodded politely, but maintained a respectful distance during the service. It was only afterward, as the congregation spilled into the churchyard, that he approached. Miss Reed, he greeted her, looking handsome in a clean white shirt and dark vest. Still up for that ride? I am, she confirmed. He offered his arm. My buckboard's just over there. I thought we might have a picnic if that suits you. The day was perfect for riding, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sagebrush and pine from the distant mountains. Mason proved to be an excellent guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area as they traveled. My family came here when I was 12, he explained as they followed a creek that wound through a meadow bright with wildflowers. My father was looking for a fresh start after the war. He'd fought for the Union and found Virginia unwelcoming afterward. And your mother? Helena asked, comfortable enough now to ask personal questions. A shadow passed over Mason's face. She died on the journey west, fever. He was quiet for a moment. My father never really recovered. He passed 5 years ago, leaving me the ranch. I'm sorry, Helena said softly. It's hard to lose those we love, Mason nodded, then visibly brightened. But he lived to see me make something of myself, and he loved this land. He gestured to the vista before them. It's hard not to. Helena had to agree. The landscape was dramatically beautiful, rugged, untamed, and vast in a way the East could never be. They stopped at a spot overlooking a valley where Mason spread a blanket and unpacked a lunch of cold chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. Mrs. Wilkins' contribution, he explained, laying out the feast. She thinks you're too thin. Helena laughed. She told me the same about you this morning. They ate companionably, sharing stories of their lives. Helena told him about growing up in Philadelphia, her years at teacher's college, and caring for her parents during their illness. You gave up a lot to nurse them, Mason observed. Helena shrugged. They were my parents. It wasn't a sacrifice, just duty. Still, not everyone would have done it. Mason looked at her thoughtfully. You have a caring heart, Helena Reed. Something in his gaze made her cheeks warm, and she looked away, focusing on the sweeping landscape. Will school start soon? She asked, changing the subject. 3 weeks, Mason confirmed. That'll give you time to settle in and prepare. There are about 20 children of school age in town and from nearby farms. Some of the older boys only come in winter when there's less work. And the school board, what do they expect, honestly? That you teach reading, writing, and figures, and maybe keep the wilder boys from burning down the schoolhouse. His eyes twinkled. The last part's not a joke. Tommy Jenkins nearly managed it with a chemistry experiment last year. Helena laughed. I'll keep the matches locked away. They spent the afternoon exploring more of the countryside, with Mason pointing out his property in the distance, a sprawling ranch with a small herd of cattle visible as tiny dots on the hillside. It's not the biggest spread, he admitted, but it's mine, free and clear. The horse business in town does well too. You should be proud, Helena said sincerely, building all that yourself. Mason looked pleased at her approval. What about you? Are you planning to stay in Eagar long? The question caught Helena off guard. She hadn't thought much beyond escaping Philadelphia and her grief. I don't know, I signed a 1-year contract with the school board. A lot can happen in a year, Mason said, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. Yes, Helena agreed softly, I suppose it can. The next weeks flew by as Helena prepared for the school year. She threw herself into cleaning the schoolhouse, organizing books, and developing lessons. Mason often found reasons to stop by delivering firewood, fixing a broken window, bringing fresh apples from his orchard. The children are excited to meet you, he told her one afternoon as he repaired a wobbly desk. You're quite the topic of conversation in town. Helena looked up from the primer she was reviewing. Oh, and what are they saying about the Eastern spinster? Nobody calls you that, Mason said firmly. They say you're pretty and smart, and that Miss Jenkins is worried you'll steal her position as church organist because Mrs. Wilkins mentioned you play piano. Helena laughed. Miss Jenkins can rest easy. I have no designs on her organ. Mason hammered a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. Some of the young men in town have other worries. What do you mean? He looked uncomfortable. Just that. Well, a pretty new lady in town attracts attention. Ben Miller at the Mercantile has been asking if you're spoken for. And what did you tell him? Helena asked, amused at Mason's obvious discomfort. That it wasn't my place to say, he mumbled, focusing intently on the desk. Helena bit back a smile. Very diplomatic of you. Would you like me to tell him something else? Mason asked, finally meeting her eyes. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. No, Helena said finally. You answered correctly. I'm not spoken for, and if Mr. Miller wishes to know more, he should ask me directly. Was that disappointment that flickered across Mason's face? He nodded and returned to his work, and Helena tried to ignore the small pang of regret at her own answer. The first day of school arrived with clear skies and nervous excitement. Helena stood at the door of the schoolhouse, greeting each child and parent with a warm smile. Mason appeared mid-morning, ostensibly to fix the bell rope, but Helena suspected he wanted to see how she was faring. Everything all right, Miss Reed? He asked, tipping his hat to her as the children played outside during their morning break. Wonderful, she assured him, and it was true. The children were eager to learn, even the boys Mason had warned might be troublemakers. Though Tommy Jenkins did ask if we could study explosives. Mason's laugh rang out, drawing curious glances from the children. I warned you about that one. I promised we'd do some safe science experiments later in the term. That seemed to satisfy him for now. Mason's expression softened as he watched her. You're good with them. I love teaching, Helena said simply. I can tell. Mason hesitated, then said, some of us are having a harvest dance Saturday next at the Johnsons' barn. Nothing fancy, just music and food and company. Would you consider attending? With me, Helena's heart skipped a beat. As your friend, Mason's eyes held her steadily. As my guest, for now. Unless you'd prefer otherwise. The directness of his gaze made it clear what his preference would be. Helena found herself nodding before she'd fully considered her answer. I'd be honored to accompany you, Mr. O'Malley. His smile was like sunrise. I'll call for you at 6. The dance was lively, with fiddles and a piano providing music that had couples spinning across the barn floor. Helena had worn her best dress green with delicate lace at the collar and felt a flush of pleasure at Mason's appreciative look when he came to escort her. You look beautiful, he said simply. The evening passed in a blur of introductions, dancing, and laughter. Mason was a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her confidently through waltzes and reels. Helena found herself relaxing in his company, enjoying the simple pleasure of being held in his arms, if only for a dance. You've been holding out on me, Mr. O'Malley, she teased during a break. Where did a horse breeder learn to dance like that? My father insisted, Mason explained, handing her a cup of punch. Said a gentleman should know how to dance properly, even in the territories. He hired a dance instructor from Tucson to teach me when I was 16, most embarrassing 3 weeks of my life. Well, I appreciate his foresight, Helena said with a smile. As the evening wound down, Mason suggested they step outside for some air. The night was cool, stars blazing overhead in a way Helena had never seen in Philadelphia. I never tire of this view, Mason said, following her gaze upward. It's magnificent, Helena agreed, so much clearer than back east. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Mason turned to her. Helena, I've enjoyed getting to know you these past weeks. As have I, she admitted. I'd like to call on you properly if you're agreeable. His voice was steady, but Helena could sense the tension beneath his words. Court you, I mean. Helena's heart raced. She'd known this moment was coming, had perhaps even longed for it, but now that it was here, she hesitated. Mason, she took a deep breath. You should know that I'm not. That is, doctors have told me I cannot have children. I'm barren. The words came out in a rush, painful even after all this time. It's why I never married in Philadelphia. Once suitors learned this, they lost interest. She couldn't meet his eyes, afraid to see the same disappointment she'd seen in other men's faces. Instead, she felt his gentle touch lifting her chin until she had to look at him. Then we'll fill the house with love instead, Mason said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. Helena stared at him, searching for any sign of insincerity or disappointment, but found only warmth and determination. You can't mean that, she whispered. A man wants sons, heirs, I want a partner, Mason interrupted gently. Someone to share my life with, to build something meaningful together. If that can't include children of our own, there are other ways to create a family. A tear slipped down Helena's cheek. Most men wouldn't see it that way. I'm not most men, Mason said with a small smile. And you, Helena Reed, are worth far more than your ability to bear children. He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. So I'll ask again, may I court you properly? Helena felt something tight and painful that had been lodged in her chest for years begin to loosen. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes, you may. Mason's courtship was old-fashioned and deliberate. He called on Helena at Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house twice a week, bringing small gifts, wildflowers, books, once a beautiful hair comb carved from antler. On Sundays after church, they would ride or walk together, getting to know each other more deeply with each passing week. Helena found herself falling for this quiet, steady man who saw her for who she was, not for what she couldn't give him. Mason was thoughtful and kind, but also possessed a dry wit that matched her own. He respected her independence and her dedication to teaching, never suggesting she should abandon her profession. 3 months into the school year, as autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold, Mason invited Helena to dinner at his ranch house. "Mrs. Wilkins will come along as chaperone, of course," he assured her. "I'd like you to see my home." The O'Malley Ranch was modest but well kept, with a sturdy 2-story house built of local stone and timber. A wide porch wrapped around the front, with rocking chairs positioned to catch the sunset over the mountains. "It's beautiful," Helena said as Mason helped her down from the wagon. "My father built it," Mason explained, pride evident in his voice. "Added on to it over the years. The east wing I built myself after he passed." Inside, the house was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Mrs. Peterson, who came in to cook for Mason twice a week, had prepared a feast of roast beef, potatoes, and apple pie. After dinner, while Mrs. Wilkins dozed by the fire, Mason gave Helena a tour of the house. In one of the upstairs rooms, he paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "This was supposed to be a nursery," he explained. "My father always hoped I'd marry and give him grandchildren. I've been using it for storage." Helena felt the familiar pang of regret, but Mason squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It could be a library," he suggested. "You love books, and I've been collecting them without much organization." The thoughtfulness of this suggestion brought tears to Helena's eyes. "That would be lovely," she managed. As winter settled over Eagar, bringing snow and long evenings, Helena and Mason's courtship deepened. They shared stories of their pasts, dreams for their futures, and gradually, the physical affection between them grew from held hands to brief, tender kisses exchanged when Mrs. Wilkins wasn't watching too closely. Christmas approached, and the schoolchildren were buzzing with excitement about the upcoming holiday program. Helena had organized recitations, songs, and a small nativity play, with every child having a part to perform for their parents. The night of the program, the schoolhouse was packed with families. Mason sat in the front row, his face glowing with pride as Helena led the children through their performances. Afterward, as parents collected their offspring and headed home through the gently falling snow, Mason lingered behind. "You were wonderful with them," he said, helping Helena extinguish the lamps. "They adore you." "And I them," Helena admitted. "Even Tommy Jenkins, though he nearly set his shepherd's robe on fire with the candle." Mason laughed, then grew serious. "Helena, there's something I want to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat as he took her hands in his. "Yes, I had planned to wait until Christmas proper, but seeing you tonight with the children, so full of joy and patience, I can't wait any longer." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Helena Reed, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. Helena felt tears welling in her eyes. "Mason, are you certain?" "We've discussed this, but you could find someone who could give you children, a complete family." Mason shook his head firmly. "There's nothing incomplete about a family built on love. Helena, I love you, your mind, your heart, your spirit. Will you marry me?" The sincerity in his eyes melted the last of Helena's reservations. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Mason O'Malley." His smile could have lit the darkened schoolhouse as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a tender kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The wedding was set for June, after the school term ended. The entire town seemed involved in the preparations, with everyone from Mrs. Wilkins to the children offering suggestions and help. Helena wrote to her few remaining relatives in Philadelphia, inviting them but not expecting many to make the journey west. As spring arrived, bringing wildflowers and longer days, Helena found herself dreaming of her future with Mason. They spent every free moment together, planning their life, discussing how to combine her teaching with helping on the ranch, and simply enjoying each other's company. One Sunday in late April, Mason surprised her with a visit to a small homestead about 5 miles from town. A young woman with a tired face answered their knock, a baby on her hip and 2 small children clinging to her skirts. "Mrs. Cooper," Mason greeted her. "This is my fiancé, Miss Reed." "I hope we're not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. O'Malley," the woman replied, stepping back to let them enter the modest cabin. "Children, mind your manners now." Mason had explained on the ride over that Mr. Cooper had been killed in a logging accident 2 months prior, leaving his wife Sarah with 3 young children and a 4th on the way. "The town's been helping out," he'd told Helena, "but it's a hard situation." Now, sitting in Sarah Cooper's small home, Helena understood why Mason had brought her here. The oldest child, a boy of about 6, showed them a reader he'd been practicing with. "Miss Reed is the schoolteacher," Mason told him. "Perhaps you can read to her." As the child proudly stumbled through a simple story, Helena felt Mason watching her. She met his eyes and saw the question there, the reason he'd brought her to meet this struggling family. After they left, promising to return with some supplies from town, Helena took Mason's hand as they walked to the wagon. "You want to help them, don't you?" she asked. Mason nodded. "Sarah can't manage alone, not with a new baby coming. She has no family nearby. The community will help, but it's not the same as having a home," Helena finished for him. "I was thinking," Mason said carefully, "that we have plenty of room at the ranch. The foreman's cabin is empty since Jim got married and built his own place. It's small but sound." Helena squeezed his hand. "You want to offer them a place to live and work," Mason confirmed. "Sarah's good with a needle. She could help with mending and such around the ranch, and the older boy could start learning ranch work in a few years. It would give them stability, a chance to stay together. And the children would have education with a teacher right there on the property," Helena added, her mind already working through the possibilities. Mason's expression brightened. "You approve, then?" "I think it's a wonderful idea," Helena said sincerely. "Those children deserve a chance, and Sarah deserves help." Mason pulled her into a quick embrace. "I knew you'd understand." 2 weeks later, Sarah Cooper and her children moved into the foreman's cabin at the O'Malley Ranch. The arrangement worked better than anyone could have expected. Sarah proved to be not only an excellent seamstress, but also a good cook, and she gradually took over much of the household management, freeing Helena to continue teaching while learning the ranch business from Mason. The Cooper children thrived with the stability and care they received. The oldest boy, James, followed Mason around like a devoted puppy, eager to learn everything about horses and cattle. The younger ones quickly adopted Helena as a surrogate aunt, running to her with their discoveries and questions. As Helena's wedding day approached, she found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in less than a year. From lonely grief in Philadelphia to finding love and purpose in this small Arizona town, it seemed almost miraculous. "Penny for your thoughts," Mason said, joining her on the porch of what would soon be their home together. The sun was setting, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I expected," Helena admitted. "When I came west, I thought I was coming to teach, to escape my grief. I never imagined finding you or creating this." She gestured toward the cabin where Sarah was putting her children to bed, toward the ranch that was becoming a home to all of them. Mason took her hand, running his thumb over the engagement ring she wore. "Do you remember what I said when you told me you couldn't have children? That we would fill our house with love instead," Helena said softly. "I meant it," Mason said. "And look at us now, we're already building something special. It may not be conventional, but it's ours." Helena leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she'd never thought possible. "I never thought I could be this happy." "This is just the beginning," Mason promised. "Just wait and see." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a blue sky and gentle breeze. The ceremony was held in the small church in Eagar, packed to overflowing with townspeople and ranchers from miles around. Helena wore a gown of ivory satin that Mrs. Wilkins and Sarah had worked on for weeks, with tiny pearls sewn into the bodice and lace at the cuffs. To her surprise and joy, her mother's sister and cousin had made the long journey from Philadelphia to attend, bringing with them her mother's veil and a family Bible as wedding gifts. As Helena walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Wilkins, who had offered to give her away, She saw only Mason waiting for her at the altar, his face alight with love and promise. The vows they exchanged were traditional but spoken with deep personal meaning, each word a covenant between them. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the pastor announced, and Mason's kiss was tender yet filled with passion that promised more to come. The celebration afterward was joyous, with a feast spread under the trees near the church, music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As twilight fell, Mason and Helena slipped away to begin their life together, riding to the ranch that was now their shared home. That night, as they lay together in the master bedroom that had been Mason's father's, Helena finally felt the last of her fears melt away in the warmth of her husband's embrace. "I love you, Mrs. O'Malley," Mason whispered against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment, to this man who saw past her limitations to the woman she truly was. Life as Mrs. O'Malley settled into a rhythm that suited Helena perfectly. She continued teaching at the schoolhouse in town, while also helping Mason with the ranch accounts and correspondence. Their home became a center of community life, with Sunday dinners often including not only the Coopers, but also ranch hands, neighbors, and friends from town. Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy in July, whom she named Thomas Mason Cooper in honor of her benefactor. Helena found unexpected joy in helping care for the infant, rocking him to sleep, while Sarah tended to her other children or caught up on much-needed rest. "You're a natural with him," Mason observed one evening, finding Helena singing softly to the baby on the porch. "He makes it easy," Helena replied, smiling down at the sleeping infant. "He hardly cries at all." Mason sat beside her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Sarah says he's the easiest of all her babies. She thinks it's because he feels safe here." Helena leaned against her husband's solid warmth. "I hope so. I want all of them to feel that way." As autumn approached, Helena and Mason celebrated their 3-month wedding anniversary with a picnic by the creek where they'd had their first outing together. "Happy?" Mason asked, watching her face as she unwrapped the small gift he'd brought, a delicate silver bracelet engraved with their wedding date. "Completely," Helena assured him, leaning over to kiss him softly. "I never imagined marriage could be like this." "Like what?" Mason asked, pulling her closer. "So easy," Helena admitted. "I always thought marriage would require constant compromise and sacrifice, and there is some of that, of course, but mostly it's just good. Being with you feels right." Mason smiled, trailing his fingers through her hair, which she'd left unpinned for their private celebration. "I feel the same way, like we were meant to find each other." They stayed by the creek until sunset, talking about their plans for the ranch, the school, their future together. As they packed up to return home, Mason helped Helena onto her horse. She'd become an accomplished rider under his tutelage, and then paused, looking up at her with a serious expression. "There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you," he said. "I've been corresponding with an orphanage in Tucson." Helena's breath caught. They'd spoken in generalities about possibly adopting children someday, but hadn't made specific plans. "Oh, they have 2 siblings, a boy of 4 and a girl of 6, whose parents died of fever last month." "No relatives have come forward." Mason watched her face carefully. "The orphanage is overcrowded and they're trying to place children in good homes." "You want to adopt them," Helena said softly, not a question but a realization. Mason nodded. "I think we could give them a good life. But it's a big decision, and I wouldn't want to move forward unless you're completely certain." Helena thought about their home, already filling with love as they'd promised each other. About Sarah's children running happily around the property, about the community they were building. "When can we meet them?" she asked, her voice steady despite the emotions welling within her. Mason's face broke into a radiant smile. "Really, you want to?" "Of course I do," Helena said, reaching down to touch his cheek. "You promised me a house filled with love, Mason O'Malley, and I intend to hold you to it." 2 weeks later, they traveled to Tucson together to meet the children. The orphanage was a grim place despite the nuns' best efforts. Too many children, too few resources. The siblings, Daniel and Emma, were thin and solemn-faced, clinging to each other as they were introduced to the potential new parents. "Hello," Helena said gently, kneeling to be at their eye level. I'm Helena, and this is my husband, Mason. The little girl, Emma, stared at her with suspicious brown eyes. Are you going to separate us? No, Mason said firmly, joining Helena on the floor. Never. If you come to live with us, you would both come together. And you have horses? Daniel asked, the first words he'd spoken. Mason smiled. Many horses, and cattle and chickens, and a dog named Rusty who loves children. Helena reached into her bag and pulled out 2 small gifts, a carved wooden horse for Daniel and a rag doll for Emma that Sarah had helped her make. We brought these for you. But you don't have to decide anything today. We can visit again, get to know each other better. The children accepted the gifts cautiously, but by the end of the visit, Emma had climbed into Helena's lap to show her how the doll's dress buttoned, and Daniel was peppering Mason with questions about ranch life. As they left, promising to return the next day, the Mother Superior pulled them aside. Those children haven't shown that much animation since they arrived, she said. You've given them hope. Over the next 3 days, Helena and Mason spent hours with Daniel and Emma, gradually earning their trust. By the end of their stay in Tucson, adoption papers had been drawn up, with the agreement that the children would come to the ranch after a 2-week waiting period to ensure all legal requirements were met. On the journey back to Eagar, Helena could hardly contain her excitement. Do you think they'll like the rooms we've prepared? She asked Mason. Should we get more toys? Books? Emma mentioned she likes stories. Mason laughed, squeezing her hand. We'll make sure they have everything they need. Sarah's already planning to sew new clothes for them, and Mrs. Wilkins is knitting sweaters for the winter. I can't believe we're going to be parents, Helena said, the words still new and wondrous on her tongue. Thank you, Mason, he looked at her quizzically. For what? For this life. For seeing possibilities where I saw only limitations. For keeping your promise about filling our house with love, Mason's expression softened. Helena, you've given me just as much, more even. You make our house a home. When they returned to the ranch, they threw themselves into preparations for the children's arrival. The room that had once been intended as a nursery was divided into 2 small but comfortable bedrooms, decorated with cheerful quilts and small touches to make each child feel welcome. The 2 weeks seemed to crawl by, but finally, the day came when Mason and Helena returned to Tucson to bring Daniel and Emma home. The children were nervous but excited, clutching small bundles that contained their few possessions. Are we really going to live with you forever? Emma asked as Mason helped her into the wagon. That's the plan, he assured her. You're going to be Emma O'Malley now, and your brother will be Daniel O'Malley. The little girl's eyes widened. We get your name too. Of course, Helena said, adjusting the blanket around the children as the autumn air had a chill to it. That's what families do. The journey home took 2 days, with an overnight stay at a small hotel along the way. By the time they reached the ranch, the children's initial shyness had begun to fade, replaced by curiosity about their new home and family. Sarah and her children were waiting on the porch to greet them, along with several of the ranch hands and their families who lived in cabins on the property. Mrs. Wilkins had come from town, bringing a cake to celebrate the occasion. Welcome home, Helena said as Mason lifted the children down from the wagon. This is your home now for as long as you want it to be. Daniel looked around at the ranch, the mountains beyond, the smiling faces of their welcoming committee. It's big, he said uncertainly. You'll get used to it, Mason promised, and we'll be right here to help you learn your way around. Emma slipped her small hand into Helena's. Can I see my room now? Helena felt her heart expand with love for this solemn little girl who was now her daughter. Of course you can, sweetheart, and then maybe you can help me make biscuits for dinner. Would you like that? Emma nodded, a tiny smile breaking through her serious expression. I used to help my mama make biscuits. Then you can show me how, Helena said, leading her inside while Mason followed with Daniel. The adjustment wasn't always smooth. Both children had nightmares in the beginning, crying out for parents who would never return. Daniel was sometimes withdrawn, while Emma had occasional tantrums born of grief and confusion. But day by day, with patience and steady love, they began to settle in. Daniel took to ranch life with enthusiasm, following Mason and James Cooper around, learning about horses and cattle with the quick absorption of childhood. Emma became Helena's shadow, helping with cooking and household tasks, and showing a quick mind for letters and numbers that delighted her new mother. By Christmas, 6 months after Helena and Mason's wedding, their home had transformed completely. Where once Mason had lived alone in his father's house, now a family gathered around the large kitchen table each evening. Sarah and her 4 children took their meals with them most days, creating a joyful, if sometimes chaotic, household. Did you ever imagine this? Helena asked Mason on Christmas Eve as they watched the children hanging stockings by the fireplace. Emma was directing the operation with the authority of an old soul, while Daniel and James argued good-naturedly about the best placement for the greenery they'd gathered. "Not in my wildest dreams," Mason admitted, his arm warm around her waist, "but I wouldn't change a thing." Helena leaned her head against his shoulder. "Nor would I." Later that night, after stockings were filled and children were tucked into bed with promises that Santa would indeed find them at their new home, Helena and Mason sat alone by the fire, enjoying a quiet moment together. "I have something for you," Mason said, pulling a small package from his pocket. "I wanted to give it to you privately." Helena unwrapped the gift to find a locket on a delicate gold chain. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, Daniel and Emma, their faces serious in the formal portrait they'd had taken in town the previous week. "Oh, Mason," Helena breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "It's perfect." "Open the other side," he urged gently. She did, and found a small piece of paper carefully folded to fit the locket. Unfolding it, she read the words written in Mason's neat hand. "A house filled with love, as promised." Helena couldn't speak, her throat tight with emotion. Instead, she threw her arms around her husband's neck, holding him close as tears of joy slipped down her cheeks. "Merry Christmas, my love," Mason whispered, holding her just as tightly. As the years passed, the O'Malley Ranch flourished, as did the family that called it home. Helena continued teaching in town until more children joined their household, 2 more sets of siblings from the orphanage in Tucson, bringing their total to 6 adopted children ranging in age from 3 to 12. At that point, Helena set up a schoolroom at the ranch itself, teaching not only their children but also the Cooper children and those of the ranch hands who lived on the property. The ranch expanded as well, with Mason purchasing adjoining land and increasing his herd and horse breeding operation. Sarah Cooper eventually married one of the ranch hands, a quiet widower named Robert Parker who had 2 children of his own. They built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, creating yet another branch of the extended family that centered around the main house. Daniel, the first boy they had adopted, showed a natural aptitude for ranching and horses, becoming Mason's right hand by the time he was 16. Emma, their first daughter, developed Helena's love of teaching and books, eventually going to a teacher's college in California before returning to help with the ranch school. Through it all, Helena and Mason's love deepened and strengthened. They faced challenges together: drought years that threatened the ranch, a fire that destroyed part of the stable, illness that swept through the community, but they also celebrated countless joys. Birthdays and holidays, achievements and milestones, quiet moments and grand occasions. 10 years into their marriage, as they celebrated Daniel's graduation from the ranch school and his official apprenticeship in the family business, Mason found Helena sitting alone on their porch, watching the sunset. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. O'Malley," he asked, settling beside her in what had become their favorite evening ritual. Helena smiled, taking his hand, more weathered now with a few scars from years of ranch work, but still strong and steady. "I was thinking about our wedding day and what you promised me." "About filling the house with love," she nodded. "I think we've succeeded beyond even your wildest imagination." Mason chuckled, looking toward the corral where Daniel was showing his younger siblings how to properly saddle a horse. "That we have, no regrets." Helena turned to face him, Taking in the face she loved a bit more lined now, with silver threading through his dark hair, but his eyes still held the same warmth and devotion they always had. "Not a single one," she assured him. "I came west looking for a new beginning, but I found so much more. I found a life fuller and richer than I ever dreamed possible." Mason leaned in to kiss her softly. "As did I, my love, as did I." As twilight deepened into dusk, they remained on the porch, hands linked, watching their family, the one they had built together, not through birth but through choice and love and commitment. Children's laughter filled the air, mingling with the gentle sounds of the ranch settling for the night. "I love you, Helena O'Malley," Mason said quietly. "And I love you," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder as the first stars appeared overhead. "Forever and always." They had kept their promise to each other, creating a home and a legacy that had nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with love. It wasn't the life either of them had envisioned in their youth, but it was infinitely better, a house filled with love, just as they had pledged on that long-ago night when Helena had revealed her deepest fear, and Mason had transformed it into their greatest blessing.